Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi asks people to work together to create a new India in the next 5 years. What are major challenges facing a new India? India has surpassed China as the world's fastest growing economy and is forecast to be so for the next 10 years. Will the Indian economy overtake China's? India is the largest democracy in the world. Some say Indian democracy has been undermined because of corrupt politicians and poor governance. But others disagree. Is democracy in India a success or failure? Both China and India are emerging markets with big potential for development. As the border standoff between China and India continues, is a dragon-elephant showdown inevitable? How does India position China, Russia and the United States in its foreign policy? What a bear hug. As China slows, India has become the world's fastest growing economy. Some economists predict that the country's GDP will increase by 7.3% or even higher in 2017. Since he took office in 2014, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has committed to building a new India by transforming the economy. What are his plans? How will India transform its economy? What challenges are lying ahead? To discuss the issues related to the Indian economy and more, I'm pleased to be joined by Anna Tangen, author and columnist, Dr. Li, Senior Research Fellow with the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, and Atul Aneja, correspondent of The Hindu, based in Beijing, of course. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Last year, India was able to surpass the United Kingdom in terms of the GDP and became the 6th largest economy. The whole world was shocked by its dynamics and, of course, the rapid pace of its development. So what do you think should be the major driving force behind the economic miracle which allegedly is presided by Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
Well, the real dynamic comes two. One is the economic reforms which have taken place, but other is the Indian human capital. And that is the skill set is available right now. Second thing is that when it comes to manufacturing, is a low labor cost in India. What used to be in China a decade or a couple of decades ago is something, that advantage, the cost advantages are there in India as well. The third, of course, is the demographic dividend which we have, median age 27. And the third thing, the final thing is the connection with the US, for example. You know, the diaspora and people who went to Silicon Valley, etc., learned the ropes regarding IT, and you know, we used to talk at that time about brain drain, but actually it's been a boon to us rather than a brain drain, because these very people have come back to invest, and in places like Bangalore, etc., have made a new Silicon Valley kind of a situation in India. So there are a variety of factors which have gone in. We were not very strong on manufacturing because of historical reasons, but because of the human capital, I think that has been the key, and the policy framework which followed after 1990, starting with Dr. Manmohan Singh, the former Prime Minister, then Finance Minister.
Well put. Labor dividends as well as a brain gain instead of a brain drain. That should be the major driving force behind the economic rise of India. What do you think? What are your thoughts about the dynamics of the Indian economy?
Well, people have to understand that although they only have that $2 billion, if you look at purchasing power parity, what you can actually buy, they're almost up to 10 trillion in terms of their economy. So it's not quite the picture that you would imagine. If you're in India, the actual lifestyle and the cost of life is quite different. This is the way it was in China quite some time ago, and if you look at purchasing power parity, it's different. And I think Modi should be given a lot of credit. He's done a number of things which seem to be going towards a cashless society. Why is this important? The things that he has done, first is the bank account drive. Second, he got rid of the larger bills. Third, he's been pushing this GST, which is this system of tax which is at the federal level instead of at all of these different levels in the different provinces. This has been very important, and what it does is it's going to allow him to start collecting revenues, because right now only 1.5% of all Indians actually pay income tax. I mean, that is astounding, especially for a country that has $1.5 trillion, all right, in black money overseas.
What Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been doing since 2014, when he took the office, is often compared to Deng Xiaoping, a late paramount leader in China. And therefore, he is accused of practicing strongman politics. And therefore, it doesn't make any sense for India, allegedly, to repeat what China went through much of the 1980s and 90s. What do you think of such controversial comments on India?
I don't think it's we can compare. There's a comparison between two people, from with different society.
There's no parallel comparison between Modi and Deng Xiaoping, but he is called Deng Xiaoping of India.
Yeah, I think it's only in terms of the reform. This actually indicates some kind of high expectation, from both people. From people both inside India and also outside India. That's why I think the driving force for the rapid economic growth from India in the recent past, I think maybe because of the high expectation, or in other words, confidence of people for his reforms, because he came to power because of people thinking he is a reformer like Mr. Deng Xiaoping. So what I mean here is that maybe in the future it depends on because after he came into office, he put forward a lot of initiatives or programs like Making India, Digital India, Smart Cities, and also Skill India. So many initiatives. There are high expectations for them to be implemented.
He's a smart guy, of course, a politician with great vision, but no big deal, many of the Chinese here say, because what he has done is actually based on the legacy of Manmohan Singh, his predecessor. But Deng Xiaoping was so different. What he did was actually based on the ruins brought about by the Cultural Revolution, the leftist ideology, and the national economy of China back in the late 1970s was actually on the brink of total collateral collapse. And therefore, we start to rebuild China from almost scrap. In sharp contrast, what do you think of the legacy of Manmohan Singh?
Well, Manmohan Singh, look, I have to first agree with you on Deng Xiaoping. Modi is a work in progress. Deng Xiaoping did something fundamentally. He altered China when it was in deep crisis after the, as you mentioned, Cultural Revolution, and thereafter to think out of the box, and the whole development model, starting from Shenzhen, coastal development, manufacturing, etc., and then integrating with globalization. I think it's an amazing feat, and China has benefited from that. So he has done some primary sort of ideological thinking, which I don't see Modi doing it. We will see. What Modi has given is as coming to your original question, he has amplified the framework and the foundation which was laid by Manmohan Singh. First as finance minister, and more so after he became the 2 terms as Prime Minister.
You mean he presided the economic recovery of India on the shoulders of Manmohan Singh?
I think so, he did so, but then you have to give...
Are you talking about consistency in your national economic policy?
There is. And I think there is a consensus across the parties that we will go ahead with the reform process. But what Modi has contributed is he's given leadership, he has energized, he has somehow carried the young people of India and given them hope. With his programs, what Ms. Lily had mentioned about the Skill India, Digital India, and therefore that kind of optimism, which is so important for any economic rise, has been provided. That impulse has been, animal instincts, you can say, animal spirits as they call. This has come from Modi, which was lacking in the Manmohan Singh era. Manmohan Singh, great intellectual, but Modi, politician someone who is still a politician, but maybe aspires to be a statesman.
Maybe Prime Minister Modi deserves credit for his sense of humility, because he says, I'm not an economist. At the same time, he's called top strong administrator. India is, of course, the biggest, the most populous democracy, and yet he's called a strong man. Do Do you see the two things compatible with each other?
Well, I think so. You can see that in Russia, you can see that in the United States, you can see it in countries around the world, even in China. Xi Jinping is a strong leader, and people are looking for that, especially in a world which is recovering from the monopolar U.S. dominance.
But I'm afraid the strongman leadership in China is very, very different from the strongman politics in India,
it's different.
which is called a democracy.
I know, but as a result, it's a little bit difficult. Everyone has a different pathway, and unfortunately, in his case, he has to use a lot of kind of populist tools. Some of those are stoking kind of Hindu nationalism, and this could have deleterious effects for the rest of things. This is, after all, it is the second largest Muslim population in the world, and you can't ignore them forever. But I think Modi, coming from the background that he does, he was a Dalit. He was from the lowest untouchable caste. He rose to be the most powerful man in India. And I think that example is something that brings a lot of hope, especially to young people who are 60% of the population are under 30. This is the most important demographic, and they're going to be a new and different voice as it goes forward.
And therefore, do you forecast resounding campaign victory of BJP in a couple of years for this ruling party to continue for another 5 years?
Right now, yes, I think so. I don't see them any counterforce really emerging in the Indian political spectrum. The Congress is not there right away, unless something catastrophic happens. I think they are on the way to winning a second term.
Let's come back to examine dynamics of the Indian economy. A second most controversial argument about the success of the Indian economy, I'm afraid, is why your country's economy could leapfrog from agricultural society to a software industry based on digital technology. I mean, this is amazing for most of those who follow your development.
Well, it is also because of
in sharp contrast, China, went from agriculture to manufacturing, and then we're talking about AI. Artificial intelligence, step by step. This is what we call the gradualist approach. But yours sounds like a shock therapy.
No, there was no other option because of historical circumstances. Because when we started after our independence, we did not have an ecosystem either for capitalism, or for a classical socialist economy. So it was a hybrid kind of model which was not delivering. I don't want to just to cut a long story short. What really happened was that the ideological clarity really comes with the reforms in 1990 when the old system was not working. And at that time, we had one major asset which was created. I come to the first point, which was human capital, a well-educated, English-speaking population. And this is also a time when the globalization starts. So the opportunities, the ecosystem now developed between the back offices of India and what's happening in the United States.
We understand your national pride of having democracy, young labor force, labor dividends, so on and so forth. However, India has raised its current literacy rate of 75% from in 2016 from 12% at the time of your independence in 1947. Yet it still lags far behind the world average literacy rate of 84%. How will the Indian government train its workforce effectively, and what are the challenges?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a massive challenge, because you may have a demographic dividend, which is 70% population under 30, but if you don't train this and impart skills to this population, then this can be a drag to your growth. So education and training is absolutely vital. And I also come to another point. I do not think we can leapfrog into a digital age right from agriculture. Manufacturing has to come through here, and that's where India, the future of India, if we want to have a real employment generation created of ordinary millions and millions of people who are coming into the workforce, we have to get into advanced manufacturing. And how do you, in fact, not even advanced manufacturing, we need manufacturing like light industry, for example, textile, footwear, furniture. This is what is going to generate employment. But we need foreign capital here because domestic capital is not. So leapfrogging, not possible. The other point, education.
For politicians,
absolutely.
For politicians who are also said to be economists, the most important issue, I'm afraid, is job creation. Jobs, full employment as much as possible. However, almost no new jobs have been created under Mr. Modi, Dr. Lily. In the late Manmohan Singh years, economists argue at least 400,000 extra jobs were added yearly. But in the last 3 years of Mr. Singh's government from 2011 to 14. On average, 579,000 extra jobs were added yearly in India. But that was far too few, considering roughly 1 million people in the labor market. What do you think of the challenges that the Prime Minister Modi is facing in the creation of jobs compared with his predecessor? He is coming under fire from opposition party and the critics that there's no much of the dynamism that they had long expected for him to create jobs.
Yeah, that's the question I mentioned, that, how to see the consequence of his reform. It is the delivery, whether he can deliver, his promise. Because when he came to power, during the election, he promised to make more jobs. And I think the job problem is always to any government in India, because of the second largest populous country in the world, and also this is a very young society. So
with a long history.
Yeah, but
But you are watching Dialogue with Dr. Lily, Mr. Atul Naja, correspondent of The Hindu based in Beijing, and Mr. Anatanga, our regular commentator here. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Well, this is the first chapter of our special series devoted to a rediscovery of India. The other two chapters will be about political institutions in India, whether they are the competitive edge or the other way around for the future of your country, the largest neighboring country of China. And the last chapter is about the so-called dragon elephant geo-economic and geopolitical rivalry in Asia. Now, let's look at the other alleged vulnerabilities that Prime Minister Modi faces. Local business leaders in your country, Atul, quietly grumbled that there is no dynamism on the ground, little consumer demand, much infrastructure such as wobbly roads and slow freight trains needs improving, to say nothing of the indebted banks, state-run and vulnerable to political meddling. And they won't land without reform. What do you make of their grievances?
Look, there is an acute shortage of infrastructure in India. If we have to grow now from, say, 7 to 10%, which is the aspiration, without quality infrastructure, which means rail, roads, ports, power, without that we can't make it. It's absolutely clear.
Look,
what has happened is, with Modi coming in, Modi is trying to create that framework. I think it's too harsh to judge a person who comes to power only in 2014. So, but what he has done is, and what you were mentioning earlier, is creating that framework, whether it's financial inclusion, whether it is the institutions which will lay down the infrastructure, the blueprint for the rise of India through foreign capital investment, because as you mentioned, banks are a big problem. They're not lending, so we need foreign capital to do basic things right now. So, you're creating that framework, but I think he can be judged only after he completes, say, at least a decade and see the results. It's too harsh to judge him right now, and these are the teething problems which will happen when a reformer comes into play. And the great grievances which are coming up.
And I do believe foreign direct investment will most likely replace the lending from homegrown banking industry, the alleged flawed banking industry in India.
Well, no, the banks in India are not in good shape. They have very similar problems in many ways to China in terms of zombie companies that no one will force down because they don't want to take a write down on the loans themselves. So they just keep them going. In terms of foreign capital, I mean, Mauritius, Singapore, then the US and UK are the 4 largest providers of capital coming in, infrastructure, but it's not enough. It's a drop in the bucket. Now, here's the interesting thing that I would posit. The key to the future of Modi's India and his vision is actually quite in line with the Belt and Road Initiative. What does the Belt and Road offer? It offers infrastructure. Not only does it offer the expertise to do it, but it offers the capital, the investment to do it. A road through India would be very, very interesting because it would present an opportunity to China to push through an area that would be relatively safer than some of its other routes and might actually help solve some of the issues between Pakistan and India. So there are opportunities here. So when you say that he's a novice, I think there are opportunities that could settle a lot of things, even border disputes. If a much larger discussion
here is the most interesting issue of mistrust between the two largest economies in Asia, due to the history of border disputes as well as Dalai Lama, for example. Now, what do you think of the Belt and Road Initiative that our President Xi Jinping put forward 4 years ago? Why Prime Minister Modi was absent from the summit meeting that our President Xi Jinping presided a couple of months back in Beijing? Was it because only of the Kashmir, the land of control, the Sino-Pakistan economic corridor?
Yeah, I totally agree that for the Belt and Road Initiative, it's really an opportunity for India, especially the India Modi government. He puts the infrastructure and also the manufacturing as the two pillars of his economic vision. So I think in this sense, actually, the Belt and Road Initiative can play a role in the Indian economic growth, but it's really concern from the Indian side. I think that is because of the the mistrust between the two countries, and also of course.
Are you sure, your Prime Minister will be coming to attend the BRICS summit in Xiamen, coastal city of Fujian province, so that the two leaders, our President Xi Jinping and your Prime Minister, will be able to meet and have a real interesting indoor discussion on the sidelines?
I think he is going to come. There are no signs at all, given the preparatory work which is going, despite the standoff. In fact, the preparations are going on full swing, let me put it that way. So that is going to happen. And I think it's a great opportunity for the two leaders to meet, because the agenda is big now. But I think there is also a necessity to create some new institutions. What has happened is the India-China strategic dialogue was anchored in the late 80s when Rajiv Gandhi came over here, and the early 90s when we have confidence building measures on the border. But both countries have changed. China has transformed itself. It's a different country with logical, rational interests beyond its borders because of its economic rise, as is India, which also occupies a great geocultural space right up to the ASEAN countries. But there is no framework for these two countries to talk out their interests. Of course, China will get into Nepal or Sri Lanka, just as India is going to get into Southeast Asia. But then where do we talk all this out, that, okay, what are your interests, what are mine, and we come to a modus vivendi and understand each other. I think this meeting which takes place in Xiamen, if it gives us an opportunity to create an institutional framework where two aspirational countries can talk out their concern and reduce the mutual trust, that will be a great contribution, because I'm afraid we may resolve Doklam. There is no framework to prevent another Doklam from happening. So we have a big agenda. If we are going to realize the potential of what you were mentioning earlier, of the Belt and the Road and others.
Atul, Anna and Lily, we certainly expect to have an impressive breakthrough coming out of the summit between Mr. Xi Jinping and Mr. Modi on sidelines of the BRICS summit. However, many of the Chinese investors and nationals who are now working in your country, India, are skeptical about what's going to happen next because of the border standoff and the growing mistrust between our two countries. Look at the mad sentiments of nationalism on both sides, particularly the Indian media. You've been interviewed many times, Anna. Do you think So what do you think? What do you think of the mistrust?
Well, quite frankly, these are affairs of state, and they will not be settled by the media. And that's quite clear. I mean, selling copies of or trying to get people to watch your television show is not the same thing as trying to run a country. So I always posit to them, there's two things wrong with this. First off, you, the media, do not control this. Second, there is no end game to this. A war between China and India is disastrous for both. Now, there are some very positive signs. India has not withdrawn and is an active member of SCO. This is a Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They're also part of the AIIB. In fact, the chief representative from India, who's second in seniority there, is his finance minister, previously from Gujarat. This is a person who's very, very close to Modi, whom Modi trust implicitly, and he's been placed here in China. So I do think there is groundwork for them to work together, as long as the media can be pulled back and stop this kind of yammering towards war.
So we are talking about cooperation and, of course, competition between the two largest economies in Asia. What can we learn from each other? I mean, what are the things about the Indian economy that we should aspire to learn? Now, there is a growing sense of complacency in China. They look down upon India. They say how they come from a low level of the economy, and China has become the second largest. Pretty soon we're going to surpass the United States. But if you look at the PPP, then we have already surpassed the United States. Now there is the sense of self-inflation shared by many of the Chinese nationals here. The issue is whether we have a lot to learn instead from India.
I think to learn from each other first, the basic thing is that we have to know each other. It's very pity that after so many years we don't know each other. I don't think we don't know each other enough.
Then what's wrong with the miscommunication at all? Do you take much of the blame as a correspondent here?
I think there are structural reasons to that. You know, we were into two rival camps in the Cold War, and 62 happened. So, you know, for 30 years this relationship was frozen out. So we are beginning to get back, but I think people-to-people contact, and then the spiritual and other connections, which is so strong and powerful. I was in a place, this Dunhuang, of the Buddhist grottos. And
yeah, Buddhism came from India.
So the power of the cultural relationship is untapped, and it's amazing. But, you know, we have not reached there. Our far history is great, but our near history is a problem. And that's something which needs to be addressed right now.
And cultural ignorance goes two ways. There are very few people in China that I know much about India, and a lot of the views they have are quite stereotypical. So it's something that has to be mutually addressed. This is one of the issues that the SCO also, the Belt and Road, addresses. This idea of having person-to-person exchanges that create cultural and linguistic understanding.
But sadly, one of the things that has been tweeted is a call by a very famous yoga master in India who appeals for preparations for war and a showdown with China. But that has really upset the Chinese, who have been driven mad by yoga, which also comes from India. Thank you very much for being part of this meaningful dialogue. This is only the first chapter of our